Hey listeners, thanks again for tuning in for another episode of the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Today's topic is titled Combining Technology, Processes, and Change Management to Address the Aging Workforce. And joining the conversation today and making his second appearance on the podcast is none other than Randy Heisler, who is a managing principal at Lifecycle Engineering. Randy will explain how we can use technology, implement processes, and conduct effective change management to manage the knowledge loss from the baby boomer generation to the next. Now let's get the conversation started with Randy Heisler in combining technology, processes, and change management to address the aging workforce. Normally, Randy, I'd have my guests always introduce themselves by giving a brief background about themselves, but since you've done that once already, I'll just say, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back, Derek.
So to get right into the discussion, I want to talk about, in 2015, you keynoted at the Combustion Turbine Operations Technical Forum in Idaho on this topic of combining technology and processes and culture to improve what we call bottom line performance. So let's begin here by going into more detail about this coming together of three distinct areas of a business.
A lot of organizations are facing this same issue, and it's become a pretty hot topic these days.
Indeed, it has. So with that, a lot of manufacturing facilities have the right technology in place. And by that, I mean they have predictive maintenance or condition monitoring, CMMS, and so on. But why are there still so many fires to put out?
Well, Derek, that's probably the million-dollar question. A lot of organizations find themselves in a reactive environment. And so maybe we'll explore that a little bit. You know, I like to always start with the process. Okay, the maintenance process that's in place. Many times, that process is really built around that reactiveness, and so it's one of the things that in trying to solve this issue is maybe to first look at what kind of business process around maintenance is in place. Okay, at the site. So it's often the case where something breaks and the mechanic or electrician's been notified, and off they run out there to take care of the problem. And they end up running around trying to find information, trying to find the tools they need, parts and materials, and then they get the job done. So too many times, and driven by a lot of other factors that we'll touch on, organizations are in that reactive environment. And actually, believe it or not, okay, that what I've described there should only happen about 10% of the time. And so if it's happening more than that, it's something that must be addressed, and hopefully I can touch on some ideas around that to help with that problem. Probably another area that where people struggle is they don't really know where their problems are coming from. And we like to look at reliability, across the entire life cycle of an asset. How was it designed? Was it designed to be reliable? Because if it wasn't, we're now dealing with that for that entire life cycle of that asset. So that's driving sometimes some of that reactivity. What are we buying? Are we buying the right parts and components? Are we buying the cheapest ones? Okay, and are we buying a high quality item that's designed to last at the lowest possible cost? How are we storing it? Is it laying out in the weather? Is it in a non-atmosphere controlled environment? There's many parts and components, especially electronic components, that need to be stored properly. That drives some of these issues, some of these problems. How we install it, how we start it up. And then we get into the everyday problems of how are we operating it, how are we maintaining it. And I always like to pick on our operations partners to say, are you operating it like a rental car or like a car that you own and care about the reliability of? And then always from the maintenance perspective, which often gets a lot of the blame out there, is are they maintaining it properly, and are they, as an organization, focusing on maintaining it properly in order to get the longest life? So those are just a few things that kind of enter into why we have so many fires. And another aspect is knowing when does equipment fail, right? So if we have some insight into that will help us do the right proactive things so that we don't have the failure in the first place. Another kind of interesting statistic is that equipment fails randomly 89% of the time. Well, that's pretty tough to handle, to manage if we don't know when something's going to break. So it's very important, once again, to try to keep those fires down, to predict failures and know that something is happening, starting to occur before we actually have a full functional failure. So, once again, that gets into the predictive maintenance side of the equation. That kind of goes hand in hand with our work processes. How do we do work? How do we find out about work? And if we're predicting failures, we can now plan and schedule that work so that we're way ahead of that failure. So we can now start to be more proactive, which starts to lessen those fires that you asked me about. And maybe one more area to touch on is process intelligence. There are so many. I've had people say, we have tons of data. It's just flowing in here. But are we utilizing it properly? And in this day and age, we're getting into a lot more people using what we call process intelligence, using the data that's available to us from our systems and having that help us predict and monitor, our failures.
Now I want to talk about the aging workforce, so this changeover that's going to occur. Here's an interesting statistic. At many manufacturing and production operations, as many as 50% of the plant floor workers and nearly 75% of the management team will retire within the next 4 to 8 years. So how can organizations manage this knowledge loss?
It's pretty scary stuff, Derek. Another statistic, between now and 2030, 10,000 baby boomer era workers will turn 65 every day in the United States.
Wow.
Pretty scary stuff. What I like to talk about, we've talked about, we've got all these fires going on out there, and some of the reasons that we're able to put those fires out quickly is because we've got knowledge, right? We've got people that have been doing this for a long time, and I tend to call it, and a lot of people call it tribal knowledge, and that's what we're losing. Okay, there's a loss of that tribal knowledge. Years of that knowledge of how to work on the equipment, how to maintain it best, is simply walking out the door. But there's things we can do. One of the things is to capture existing knowledge, okay, from those people, okay, to optimize our preventive maintenance program. As an older employee myself, there's things that I like to think about in terms of leaving a legacy. Okay, and how might I do that? There was many people in their career is that they kind of go off the idea that knowledge is power, so they're maybe hesitant to share some of those things they know. Okay, but as these aging employees are getting near the end of their career, I think we can motivate them by saying, wouldn't you like to leave a legacy? Wouldn't you like to share all the things for the new person that's coming into the workforce? And one of the ways to do that is to get that older employee working with the younger employees, sit them down at the table and talk through on how to do these PMs, how to do them properly, and in many cases having to actually put those details on paper, because those details maybe didn't exist. So that's one way to approach it, standardizing our maintenance and operations work. I'm going to touch on operations as well, is that those SOPs, making sure they're detailed so that it's not just somebody that has been doing it for years that knows how to operate it or knows how to maintain it. But now we've put that information on paper, we're following those standardized procedures, and going forward, we won't make mistakes. And defining roles and responsibilities, knowing who is to do what within that work process that I mentioned earlier. Who plays what role in that? What's the role of the operations folks? What's the role of the maintenance folks? What's the role of the planners and schedulers? What's the role of the execution workforce? What's the role of the storeroom for parts? Identifying those things, clearly, so that the new employee coming in has this roadmap, has these processes to follow, has these standardized work processes to follow, and so now it's not just trying to pick up after who I might call Old Joe, who's going to walk out the door, or who maybe already has. Now we've set up, for these new employees to have what they need. Another thing that I think is pretty important is I hear a lot of organizations say, well, we're having trouble getting people to come into this workforce. everybody wants to program computers now. They don't want to come out and maintain an asset in a manufacturing plant or maintain assets in a facility. There's these other things that everyone wants to do. And I think the truth of the matter is there's a lot of people that do want to do that, but they're not quite sure where they want to go. There are so many companies out there with great perks, okay, like the Googles of the world, to come work for me and you're going to get all these things. And I think it's important to make the company or make your company attractive, okay, and so that people are knocking down the door wanting to come to work for you. As an example, here at Lifecycle Engineering, we're very proud, okay, to be one of the best places to work in South Carolina, 10 years running now. Okay, so on our website, a lot of folks that are tapping our website are tapping the careers page, right? So it's we've been very fortunate to make Lifecycle a place that someone wants to work, and so I always encourage people to do that in their own organization. Make where you work someplace that people want to work, and so you're going to get good talent to replace some of that the aging workforce that's leaving. And collaborate with local technical colleges to help you do that. There's a lot of training that can be done and things like that, so that if you've positioned the workplace to have everything that someone new needs, okay, now there's the formal training piece that a lot of community colleges can help with. And believe it or not, all of these efforts, and I always like to touch on safety, is that all of this standardized, I'm going to call it standardizing our processes, roles, responsibilities, SOPs, and PMs, all those things can also make our workplace a safer workplace. Because a reliable plant is a safe plant.
Okay, so Randy, this final question just kind of wrap up this episode, and that is there any other way that you would manage the changeover from that baby boomer generation to the next?
Well, there is, Derek, and I think I touched on it in the first podcast, is that so much of this centers around and actually should begin with change management, okay? It's we like to think that we can start managing any change through education. The education really starts to create what, like I said earlier, knowledge is power. But oftentimes people, and even in the case of old Joe that's leaving, it's trying to create ultimately some desire, okay, for him or her to leave that legacy, okay, and to create some desire, because instead of just taking that knowledge with them, which often happens, okay, that if we can educate if we can educate people on what we're trying to accomplish, that we want a reliable and safe workplace, the first thing we need to do is educate them to create some awareness of what we're trying to accomplish, and ultimately that desire to be a part of it. And if we continue to educate, they'll now have the knowledge and the ability, okay, to make that happen. And at that point, and I think I mentioned it again, and I'm a big proponent of change management, is for management to reinforce those behaviors. So it all starts with education. I think it's very, very important. Everything we do here at Lifecycle starts with education in one form or another, which what it really does at the end of the day, it engages people. It helps them understand the WIFM, what's in it for me, and especially for those aging workers that are leaving soon, is to help them feel the need, the want, the desire to create that legacy. Now, maybe in closing, just to kind of wrap it all up, I think, Derek, is that we talk about, we've talked a bit about technology. We've got the technology. We've got CMMS. We've got those great things. We've got all the technology, and yes, we've got some processes, and we've defined those, and we've also worked on the culture. No, the key to that, and it was a study done by MIT, as a matter of fact, several years back, was that it was really based on the fact that some people think, well, you know what, all I need is the technology piece. Technology will solve my problems. Not true. Actually, if all we apply is some technology, we may even go backwards. If we don't address the processes and the culture, okay, we will not get the result that we're after. But with the right combination of technology, processes, and culture, okay, our probability of success goes up near 75%. Now, one final comment, Derek, and I left last time I left this with the group because it's so important around change management, so important about trying to do these right things to manage change, is that we cannot think our way into a new way of acting. we must act our way into a new way of thinking.
Randy, thank you again for the second time being on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Insert loud applause. But we really do want to say thank you for bringing such extensive knowledge and experience to this topic. And for those listeners out there, every episode that we record here, we put on lce.com/podcast. And with each episode, we put in some additional resources just for some continued education. And under that description for this episode, you'll find those links to be one is the slide share presentation. So we have a nice slide share up there right now that talk about these the combination of these elements, technology, processes, and change management, and addressing that aging workforce. So we encourage you to go there and click that link for more education, more learning. But also we have up there another link that's the poweredbyrx.com website. So this is an awesome new resource portal that was just launched not too long ago, and it's strictly for reliability professionals wanting to learn more about reliability. Now, reliability, as we always discuss here, is a journey, and there's varying elements to that journey. And so on that website, that portal, you're going to find a slew of information about reliability and change and all this great stuff. And so today we talked about, probably workforce development and management of change. So you'll find within those 29 elements on that website, those elements specifically, and you can click on those, and there's going to be videos and articles and white papers, all of this information just for you. So we encourage you to check that out. So now that that's done, Randy, thank you so much again for joining the Asset Reliability at Work podcast for the second time, and maybe even for a third time.
Well, thank you, Derek, and I'd love to come back.
Hey, don't turn us off just yet. If you have any feedback for the show or maybe some future episode suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. There's two ways to get a hold of us. The first is by email, and that's podcasts@lce.com, or you can find us on Twitter @LCE_today. We're always looking for suggestions. Thanks, and we look forward to another episode of the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.